So today we are going to work on a special model, which is the Hawker Tempest F2 or Mark II from Kovozavody Prosteyov or Kopro, that's a mouthful indeed, in 1/72nd scale. Now, I've been wanting to build a Hawker Tempest for quite some time, but haven't been able to get around to building it. And if I had chosen it, I would have built it in the Indian Air Force scheme. However, this is a special build. It is dedicated to one of my followers on YouTube who's been patient enough and has been waiting for many months for me to build the Hawker Tempest F2. Now, this request has come from somebody across the border and I would love to oblige. So here I am going ahead with the Hawker Tempest in the Pakistan Air Force scheme. Right off the bat, you'll notice the decal sheet is top of the list, and this has decals for the Pakistan Air Force and the Indian Air Force. It's followed by an instruction sheet. This is nicely printed. It's got a sprue map, very interesting because the parts just don't match here. And then it's got about 12 steps of assembly, followed by the decal and painting guide in the end. Here's the first sprue with the wings and the propeller and the engine cowlings. The second sprue with the weapons and a few other engine construction assemblies. And the third sprue, which has the two fuselage halves, the control surfaces and the instrument panel. And you can see that it's got recessed panel lines and very nice panel line detailing on the surfaces. It also has the pilot seat and the drop tanks. And here's the clear part, which is pretty clear and good looking. Right, so the assembly begins with the construction of the cockpit, and these are nicely fitting parts. They fit together nicely, just have to be glued on, and the cockpit assembly is complete. It's got some good detail like a control column. The seat is nicely detailed, and it's also got some levers on the left and the right side which really bring out the details. I then moved on to the assembly of the engine parts by cutting out the parts of the engine cowling assembly from the sprue, and then cleaned up the little bit of flash that was left around with an X-Acto knife. I then moved on to the detailing of the instrument panel, and I first primed it in black and then used a white acrylic wash to detail the dials, and used various other colors to detail the switches on the instrument panel. This was followed up with the assembly of the two halves of the fuselage, and I began painting the interiors of the cockpit. I used Fevicryl Sap Green, and this was sprayed straight out of the bottle, thinned with water, 50-50 mix, and you can see that it gave a very nice looking green tone to the cockpit interiors. And I did the same with the cockpit floor as well. And once the paint was dry, I created a black acrylic wash. Now this is basically simple Fevicryl black paint, thinned down heavily with water, and added a drop of dishwashing liquid to enhance the details in the cockpit floor and the cockpit walls. I then moved on to the construction of the engine cowling, and the absence of locator pins caused a little bit of a trouble, but if you glue it carefully, you see that there are hardly any gaps left. It is pretty much the same case with the two halves of the fuselage. Just glue them around and you can see that there is hardly any gap between the seams. So a very nice fitting, and I was surprised that Kopro had such nice fitting. The only issue here is on the underside of the fuselage, where near the tail wheel it left a little bit of a gap, which of course can be addressed later through filler. The assembly of the nose section fit in pretty snug, and you can see that there is no gap at all in the assembly of the nose, so that's a very nice fit kit. The assembly of the wing was pretty straightforward, assembling the upper and the lower halves together. The only issue was here in the, I think these are the radiators near the wings. Now these call for the assembly of a wire mesh inside, and I totally forgot to assemble that before putting the halves together. The wing assembled into the fuselage in a very nice way. The front just fits in snug, and it needs a little bit of a wiggling around here in the rear end, but then with a drop of glue I think everything fits together very nicely. And then went for the simple and straightforward assembly of the horizontal stabilizers, and that completed the general assembly of the Hawker Tempest. I did notice, however, that there would be some filler required to address the seam lines along the fuselage, and so I added the filler along the upper fuselage and the lower fuselage where the wing met the fuselage, and right along till the end of the tail section. This was followed by standard sanding with a 180 grit sanding stick, and then smoothing with a 220 grit sanding stick. Now I'm painting the gear bay doors and the gear bay interiors here with Fevicryl sap green, which is darkened with a little bit of black inside. Moved on to the assembly of the rockets, as I would be mounting the rockets on the Hawker Tempest. The rockets basically are very fragile, and it needed very careful sanding of the flash that is left around after cutting the parts of the sprue. I did end up damaging 2 of these rockets, but in the end, of course, I'm just going to use 4 of the 8 rockets on my Hawker Tempest, so that kind of sufficed for my needs. Finally, I mounted the hardpoints for the rockets and also used the undercarriage gear bay door covers as a masking, and on top as well I masked off the canopy with blue tack, and then simply used isopropyl alcohol to clean up the surfaces and prepare it for the paint. I then primed it with Bosny Grey primer here, as you can see, and then began the laborious work of painting the model. And this started with some pre-shading of the panels with Fevicryl black. This is sprayed from a Sparmax airbrush at around 10 to 15 psi. Looking at the painting instructions, the azure blue, which is on the underside of the Pakistan Air Force Hawker Tempest, it came very close to the Fevicryl teal blue. I would just add a little bit of black into it to darken it down a little, and I think the mix came pretty close to the azure blue, which is actually there in the paint guide. Moving on to the painting of the base coat of the camouflage of the Hawker Tempest, I used a custom mix of Fevicryl burnt sienna, some white, and just a little bit of sap green to give it that greenish brown look. But I realized later on that this is basically the sand tone. It is just a little toned down with green, and I could have simply used Fevicryl brown and white to create the sand tone. Anyway, but the custom mix came out well, and here you can see that it's slowly taking shape and getting into the color tone that is desired. And then snakes on the plane. Well, jokes apart, this is blue tack and I used it to mask the camo pattern of the dark brown that is going to be painted on top of the desert ski. Now this second color of camo, I thought it would be a good idea to just darken down the original base coat of desert paint with a little bit of black, and it would produce the right amount of brown, but then I was wrong. So I had to redo the entire paint with Fevicryl burnt sienna, darkened down with a little bit of black, and brought its value down with some white into it. And now I was satisfied with the kind of coffee color, or the color of dead leaves as you would say, in this camouflage pattern. And finally this came very close to the paint guide color scheme of the Hawker Tempest of the Pakistan Air Force. I then decided to go freehand with painting of the canopy airframe, as the masking would have been a pain, so I very carefully began painting the frame of the canopy. I then used my standard procedure of applying the decal, and I must say that the decals were very high quality. In fact, they were not printed by Cartograph but were printed by Kopro itself, and I really liked the way they conformed to the surface. Finally, I moved on to the weathering phase, and I took some black and brown chalk pastel and diluted it with a little bit of water and added some dishwashing liquid into it to create a dark brownish wash. This wash was then liberally applied over all the surfaces, and you can see that it's getting into the nooks and crannies of the panel lines, and it gave a very subtle finish in the end when I wiped off the excess with a kitchen towel. I finally added the landing gear assembly and the gear bay doors, and then also added the rockets, and the final step was to add the canopy in the open position, as that's the way I like the canopies. Assembled the propeller assembly with the spinner and put it into the place where it's supposed to go, and let's crank up the Centaurus. And here are the final shots of the finished model. It's Christmas today, and what better day to give a gift to one of your followers. As interesting as the aircraft Hawker Tempest is, so is its history within the Royal Pakistan Air Force. The history starts with the Royal Indian Air Force, whose resources following partition and subsequent establishment of the Royal Pakistan Air Force had to be shared between the two countries. Following lengthy negotiations, it was agreed that Pakistan will take over 35 Tempest 2s out of the Royal Indian Air Force's inventory, which were inherited from the Royal Air Force. Tempests were selected by the Royal Pakistan Air Force because they were considered more suitable for harsh and hot weather conditions than the liquid-cooled Spitfire 8s and 14s, also operated by the Royal Indian Air Force. This meant that Pakistan would take over two Royal Indian Air Force squadrons, number 1 and number 9. The fact that Pakistan has to take over the prime squadron of India caused a lot of dismay in the Royal Indian Air Force. Nonetheless, only the physical assets were taken over, whereas all the regalia was returned to India, and the squadron was duly renumbered as number 5 Squadron, Royal Pakistan Air Force. Both squadrons were formally established on the 15th of August 1947 at Royal Pakistan Air Force Air Base, Peshawar. The first Tempests were delivered to Royal Pakistan Air Force only in September 1947, and each squadron had 6 pilots and 8 aircraft due to the shortage of both aircraft and personnel. They formed the fighter bomber wing, and the maintenance was provided by the maintenance wing for both airframes and engines based at Royal Pakistan Air Force Air Base, Drigh Road in Karachi. The aircraft were taken over from Royal Indian Air Force stocks, overhauled as they were in poor condition following RAF service, and subsequently put in storage. By early 1949, only 28 were returned to service with serial numbers A100 to A127. And depicted here is Hawker Tempest Mk.2 airframe A126, one of those 28 taken over from Royal Indian Air Force, overhauled at Drigh Road and repainted at the Royal Pakistan Air Force insignia. This airframe was immediately put into action for operations operating out of Miran Shah Air Base against the Waziristan rebellion. So thank you very much everyone for watching me build this model. If you liked the video, please click the thumbs up and do consider subscribing to the channel. Do smash that bell icon to receive all the latest updates on my videos. I will see you again in the next video. Thank you, Merry Christmas, bye bye, and stay safe.